Early 1967. You have entered the venue after seeing a poster for a million-volt light and sound orchestra. You have been interested in electronic music for a while, and seeing the poster you thought it would be fun to experience this fascinating new genre in all its glory. While inside the venue, you remember a name from the poster that caught your attention. Paul McCartney. You obviously knew him from the Beatles, but this time this was only credited to him specifically. But then, the song starts, and it's a nightmarish collage of sounds, screaming and all sorts of noises. But those screams aren't only Paul's. There's screaming from John, drumming from Ringo, guitar string from presumably George, and you realize something. This is the Beatles. After several plays throughout the evening, the song finally stops being played, and you think this is gonna be some amazing new song off their upcoming album, but it isn't. In fact, this would be the last time you and many others would hear this song, ever. Of course, the song I'm talking about and the subject of today's video is The Carnival of Light, an experimental piece that the Beatles recorded a few days before the Million Volt Light and Sound Orchestra, and it's one of the few Beatles songs that have been never released, even on bootleg recordings, making it extremely rare. In this video, I'm going to try to explain its creation, its appearance, and disappearance. This is the What Was season finale. Let's begin. 1966 was a turbulent time for the Beatles, as many controversies rocked the group, and they decided internally that stopping the tour would be the best for the band moving forward. But it was also an important time, as their genre-spanning, soundscape-defining album Revolver, released earlier that year, was a huge success. While recording the album, the Beatles became a lot more acquainted with avant-garde music, especially Paul, who was quite fond of the genre and wanted to make an avant-garde song himself. His interest in the avant-garde scene eventually led him to the design firm Binder, Edwards, and Walken. These three artists would expand Paul's knowledge of the avant-garde art a lot more, and he would eventually friend them. In late 1966, David Walken painted a colorful piano for Paul McCartney, and while delivering it to his home, he thought of something. You see, his design firm was planning a light and sound rave. So, after a simple knock on the door at Paul's home, he asked him a simple question whether he wanted to make a song for his rave or not, and Paul accepted. But he held off on recording it until January 5th, 1967, the second session of the year. That day, the Beatles were recording overdubs for the track Penny Lane, a new song intended for their upcoming album. After finishing the overdubs, Paul remembered the song he intended for the BEV rave, and suggested to his band, "This is a bit indulgent, but would you mind giving me 10 minutes? I've been asked to do this thing. All I want you to do is wander around all the stuff and bang it, shout it, play it." The session was chaotic, to say the least. The tape has no rhythm. The Beatles make literally random sounds, although they sometimes respond to each other. For instance, a burst of organ notes answered by a rattle of percussion. The basic track was recorded slow so that some of the drums and organ were very deep and sonorous, like the bass notes of a cathedral organ. Much of it is echoed, and it is often hard to tell if you're listening to a slowed down cymbal or tubular bell. John and Paul yell with massive amounts of reverb on their voices. They are Indian war cries, whistling, closed mic gasping, genuine coughing, and fragments of studio conversation. Ending with Paul asking with echo, "Can we hear it back now?" After the session ended, George Martin stated, "This is ridiculous. We gotta get our teeth into something more constructive." And so, the track was done. They eventually sent the monotape to the event organizer, and then they waited until a million-volt light and sound orchestra. From January 28th till February 8th. You're finally here. After all this time, the rave is finally starting. The song premiered for the first and last time, but you didn't know. You just stood there in pure wonder. How did music turn into this? This is the greatest thing ever made. Are a few of the crowd chatters you hear during this piece. It's played again and again and again. What's the song Paul is playing? You don't care. You just stand there. All this happened in less than 5 years. It's amazing, someone says. All this, but no one's on stage. Where are the Beatles? Eventually, you leave the venue. It's quiet, but you can't forget what you heard at that venue. In reality, John and Ringo were doing whatever, and Paul and George were watching a Four Tops concert at the Royal Albert Hall during its premiere. And Paul was quite upset that the organizers played the song multiple times instead of the agreed few times, meaning that the people in the venue actually heard Fixing a whole month before the song actually came out. Surprisingly, despite this being the Beatles, news outlets didn't actually pick up the song's premiere, since the news that they didn't follow underground rave parties, obviously. All of this had a quite but slight impact on the Beatles. They all became a lot more accustomed with avant-garde music. The song was the first avant-garde piece the band recorded, but it wasn't the first one released. Oh no, the first one to actually release on an actual album is
Number 9.
Revolution 9 was initiated by Lennon during the sessions for what would become their self-titled 10th studio album. Much like the previously released Carnival of Light, the piece has been suggested to have been influenced by avant-garde acts of the time. So why are we talking about this piece when everything about it is known? We know so much about it and it's out, you can listen to it right now. Nothing about it is related to the Carnival of Light, right? Was what I would have said if I didn't replace it as the Beatles' first avant-garde piece. Since the Carnival of Light premiered at a rather underground event, Revolution 9 was hauled as the first Beatles avant-garde piece, and Lennon was seen in the public eye as the artsy Beatle, despite Paul being the first one technically. Even if they didn't know it at first, Lennon and McCartney unintentionally showed their friendly rivalry in just 2 avant-garde compositions. As time went by, Lennon eventually forgot about the Carnival of Light composition, and so did the general public, as it was fairly uninfluential in the grand scheme of things. People just moved on. But other people didn't. Those people were bootleggers. As the music industry progressed, bootleggers started selling illegal recordings of bands either at live shows or at their studios. These bootlegs often revealed unreleased tracks by the bands that got swept under the radar due to many reasons. These bootleggers often looked for tracks from the most prestigious bands, or just bands they really liked, including the Beatles. While they managed to find almost every single song recorded by the Beatles during most of their career, they couldn't get their hands on a few songs, Carnival of Light being one of them, which is odd considering how easily Beatles songs get leaked through bootleg sources, and the fact that EMI never destroys their Beatles tapes. This hard-to-access nature gradually increased its infamy in the Beatles community, and Paul was aware of this, and when asked about it, would give answers to questions about the song.
So right, we set out some mics that actually were set out anyway for the guitar, for the drums and everything. And I said, let's just wander around these mics, and if you see a drum, just sort of bang on it or shout, hey, or hit a guitar note. So it doesn't have to be significant. We should just wander around the studio hitting stuff, and that will be my music.
He has tried many times to get the song out officially, the most infamous time being during the sessions for Anthology 2. During these sessions, McCartney talked to Ringo, George, and Yoko about potentially releasing the song in the compilation, which was supposed to be an archive of the Beatles' entire career and had a ton of takes that were less than impressive. When asked for its inclusion, George, Yoko, and Ringo all vetoed the decision, as they thought it was never truly intended for a Beatles release, and that it was too experimental, as George put it. This wasn't the only song rejected for the compilation, but it's the most well-known. Ever since then, Paul has wanted to release the song for the longest time. He still has the song in his possession, but it seemingly can't find a way to release after dozens of compilations and the 50th anniversary Super Deluxe of Sgt. Pepper's. After all that, The song seems to have no chance of being released at all. But was this ever meant to be a Beatles song? Yes, all four Beatles recorded it together during the sessions for an album. George Martin was there, they all played the instruments. So, why are we even asking this? Bands often record one-off tracks for fun or for an event, only for a single use. The Carnival of Light is a prime example of this. It's just not a piece of material that would get positive views from the public if it just randomly released right now. And yet, we still look for it. We try desperately to get at least a crumb of it out of the lost media bubble. And it's because no matter what happens in that piece of media, people will still look for it, no matter how insignificant. In April 1970, Paul McCartney stated in a press release that he was no longer part of the Beatles. This was due to many business and personal reasons the public was aware of for the past 2 years or so. But to hear the news, it utterly broke people. But it also taught them that great things are never meant to last forever, so get to know them while they're still around. Many fans tried to get through this time by buying bootlegs and collecting memorabilia, and yet they couldn't reach a few songs. In essence, the Carnival of Light is the spirit of the Beatles. It's their collaboration, their wit, their strange yet appealing style, and despite how bad and horrible it may be, it's still the Beatles. It won't be found, but it's still exciting to imagine how it could have sounded like. It's exciting to think about the stuff the public didn't get to hear from the band, and it's because people want a light at the end of the tunnel. Something they can think about long after that something they loved is gone. And it's that form of escapism that drives people to move forward. It's that kind of sheer existence that makes people think of what could be out there. And in the end, isn't that what lost media is? It's been a long year. A year full of surprises and events. It's been a year in which I discovered myself as an individual. And I've got nothing but you to thank. Thank you for watching what was. I'll see you for season 2.